In this module, we're going to do simple testing with Node and Mocha, and we'll start out pretty simply, just doing the basic stuff, but don't worry, it's going to get complex as time goes on here. So we'll start out doing very simple unit tests, and then we're going to move on to testing with dates using Moment.js. Then we'll get into behavioral testing using a process workflow. Then we're going to get into things that are a little bit more complex. Specifically, we're going to want to know if certain callbacks are being called, and also if certain methods are firing in our processes. And then we're going to handle some asynchronous code. We're going to start with an event emitter, and then I'm going to move on to the async library. But for now, let's focus on a simple unit test. Nothing tricky. We have a membership application that we need to create, so let's just focus on the basics. Let's revisit the very first scenario that I want to work with here, which is applying for a mission using all valid information. Now, what I wrote originally isn't terribly clear. I wrote email first and last, but we also have height, age, and weight that we need to consider. And it lets them in. Well, what does that even mean? Well, let's rewrite this. When working with features and scenarios, our assertions should harken back to what we expect the application or the code under test to do, given a certain scenario. So in this case, when we submit an application with a valid email, first, last, height, etc., what do we expect to happen? We expect that application to be valid, and we expect it to report that the email is valid, at the height, age, weight, and name are valid as well. This is an important thing. Right from the get-go here, what is it? Well, it should be obvious when we run our tests and see the output. So in this case, it is our feature under test. In other words, applying for a mission. And the scenario that we're trying to test here is what happens when we give all valid information. Email first, last, height. Well, what happens with that application? Well, it is valid, and it reports a valid email, height, age, weight, name, etc. All right, well, all these tests are blue, which means they are pending, so let's change that. And here I'll create a brand new file for our membership application. This is going to be a simple Node module, and I'm going to use a prototype here and just export that prototype directly. So I'll save this as membership application.js. At this point, I got a number of patterns I can use, but let's go with a simple constructor pattern. And I'll define some methods on our membership application prototype that will allow me to validate certain things, because that's what I said I would do in my test. Here I want to test if the email, height, age, and weight are valid, and then I will have an all-in-one routine, if you will. This is valid, and it'll just return the results of email, height, age, and so on, the individual tests. You might be wondering two things at this point. Why do I have all these individual methods? And why am I putting the validations here inside of the application itself? Well, the first answer is actually pretty easy. There's a lot of functionality that's going to go into each one of these validations. I want to keep things clean. I don't want to have one massive validate method. It doesn't make much sense. I'd rather have things done individually. Moreover, this is going to help us later on using the Sinon-JS library and our spies, and I'll show you that in just a bit. Well, the other question is, why am I putting this all on the application? And the simple answer for that is I like to follow tell, don't ask. This is more of a guideline than a rule. The idea here is that the logic should stay as close to the data as possible. And you want to basically tell an object to do something with its methods. Instead of asking it, hey, what's your email first, last, etc., you basically tell it to validate itself, and it does. In the Smalltalk and Ruby world, they think of this as receiving a message, and they think of methods on an object as, well, message receivers. This differs slightly from a classical understanding of methods on objects that are kind of treated like verbs. In other words, if you had a class or an object named dog, you see the classic example of say hi, and then you see bark. And that is a typical classic example of a method on an object. In the Ruby and Smalltalk world, you could also use a method to send a message to that object like walk with me, or heel, or sit. Anyway, that's the idea here behind tell, don't ask. You want to tell an object to do something, and you do so through its methods. Okay, so back to the code. At this point, I am going to be passing in some information through args, and I'll need to set properties on the application itself. And I've got a lot of work to do here because And I might have undefined things and so on, and I'm going to have required stuff that I need on my object. For this, let's use Node's assert library. This isn't just for testing. You can use it all over your code. When you expect something to come in, then you can assert that it should be there, in this case, first and last. If it's not there, then an exception will be thrown. In this case, I have to scratch my head a little bit. Is that what I want? Do I want to really stop execution if I don't have a first and last name? I don't think so. Let's take this out, and instead, I'm going to use underscore. I'd rather not be that strict, at least not yet, till I know what I'm doing. So I'm going to install underscore using npm install underscore. And if you don't know what this is, it's a utility library that allows you to do all kinds of things. In this case, I'm using the extend method on underscore, and that's going to take all of the properties and methods on args and graft them onto my membership application. That'll be nice for all the properties that I send in. So then let's fill out the validations here. For email, I'm simply checking that email exists, and there's an @ sigil in the email string. All right, next thing we need to do is fill out height, age, and weight validations. You got to remember, we are taking rockets into space, and there are certain height limitations, as well as age limitations. I know, please don't send me email. These are just rules that were handed to me from the rocket shop. What can I say? We also have weight restrictions because, well, as you know, weight and fuel, they go hand in hand. All right, looking good. Not classic TDD or BDD for that matter. We wrote our expectations here as we should have done, but I didn't exactly watch everything fail and do the red-green refactor. That's okay. As you'll see, I'm not dogmatic about this stuff. And again, I want to state that this is not about theory and testing theory, this whole course. This is more about the tools and how you use them in Node. How you put them together and write your tests is up to you. This is the way I do it, and hopefully you can see that there will be differences, probably between the way you do it and I do it.